Hello, and welcome back to another installment of our pitch deck course. We have been doing a few episodes of this, and so you know both me and Healy really well by now. You can find the example decks we're using on kruzeconsulting.com/pitch-deck. That is Kruze, Kruze, consulting.com/pitch-deck. You can find all sorts of great resources as part of this course and more on that URL. And we're super excited to talk to you today about the go-to-market slide. It's sometimes called the sales and marketing slide. Sometimes it's called the growth slide, but it's a super, super important slide, especially as you are kind of progressing in the company. From a pre-product slide, it's kind of one thing, and then it evolves quite a lot throughout the growth of the company. Yeah, should we get started?
Sure, sounds great. And I'm just going to double down on that. As your company advances, one of the things that the investors are going to expect that you're spending money on to learn and to build out is the sales and marketing function. Obviously, this is going to vary by industry. So biotech is going to be extremely different than a hardware company selling to enterprise versus an app company selling through Apple Store and Android Play and things like that. But this is a muscle that your investors are going to expect you to build. And as your company matures, they're going to expect that it gets better and better and better. And they're going to expect that you start to have metrics here, you start to have a team here, you start to be able to articulate your strategy. Very good growth with the slide. The killer sales and marketing or go-to-market slide can really carry a company with what a VC might perceive as like a mediocre product all the way through to the finish line in terms of getting invested. The best VCs don't necessarily think that they're experts on product, although many do. But if you have this killer go-to-market slide and you are clearly getting a lot of good traction on the customer side, they will kind of check their thoughts around the product and maybe think, okay, maybe I didn't understand this product, but clearly the market is getting it and clearly they know how to sell it. So make sure the slide is great. Let's talk about what you need to do to make this slide amazing. So
I love to think about the go-to-market slide as kind of the flip side of the traction slide. The traction slide takes today and looks back, and the go-to-market slide looks at today and looks forward. And so this is the story you're telling here. Like the really important piece of the narrative is the how are we going to get our next generation or our next fundraise worth of traction.
That's right. And obviously, do you need to talk about though what you've already done and what's working. Right.
Yeah.
Like what channels are working for you. And one of the things that as your company matures that this slide should have on it, I think we can all agree, is the customer acquisition cost. So how much is it costing you right now to acquire your customers? And so the easiest way to do that is to take the total number of new customers in period and divide it by the amount that you spend on sales and marketing. Things can get very complicated. I'm not sure we're necessarily going to get into the nuances, but to the extent you have a land and expand strategy, or you have a 90-day sales cycle, this can get pretty messy. But do your best to come up with a CAC that is clearly and accurately and honestly articulating what it costs for you to pull on a new customer.
Yeah. And some of your acquisition channels will be super cheap, and those will look great on your slide. And some of them will be very expensive, but can scale better, right? And so we'll get to that in a little bit, but don't fall for the trap of thinking, oh, we found a way of acquiring a customer for $1 per customer. That is great if you could scale that to millions and millions of customers for a B2C company, or scale it to like large numbers for a B2B company. But it is extremely unlikely that the most effective channels keep working as you keep tapping them for customers. One great example is your own newsletter, right? Your newsletter is likely to convert to lots of customers and be in effect extremely valuable as an acquisitions channel or as a sales channel for sure. But you only have so many subscribers, and spamming people is not a great way of getting customers in general. So be careful on that one.
For sure. So who is this for? Like, this is for you're producing this slide for the VC that wants to understand, as they put money into your sales and marketing engine, what's going to start to come out the other end, and what are the activities that happen in the middle that produce those new customers at the other end at an attractive price point, right? So you can really deep six your fundraising process if you mess this slide up.
Yeah, totally. Well, and it's interesting, right? So really what you're saying here is that you understand what the market is and who your customers are. You're explaining where you can find those customers, like where do they hang out, how can you reach them, and you're really showing what is your acquisitions funnel on a very basic level. For a very early stage company, even if your entire, like if you're doing something like mobile phone cases, you could say, oh, our customers are everybody with a mobile phone. If you haven't shipped a single product, I don't believe you, but because that's such a huge market. So you're kind of talking about, okay, what is your beachhead audience? Where are you going to go after first? And so if you happen to make, I don't know, San Francisco Giants covers for your phone, the obvious place is, well, outside of a stadium, right? You're probably not going to start a huge business there, but to use a very specific example, divvying up by some sort of cohort that you can start going after and being really, really good and using that as your test cohort is a great way to do, especially for early stage companies. Think of it as your beachhead audience. Think about where you're going to start learning first. And then hopefully the learnings you get there is to kind of, you can expand them into other audiences or other geographies.
Yeah. Do you know where your customers are? Do you know how to reach them? Do you know how to convince them to put down their credit card to purchase your product? And so if credit card is perhaps a bad example, if it's an enterprise play and it's a $250,000 software product that gets purchased by Fortune 500 companies, this slide needs to reflect the sales motion that works to get into those companies. Now, that being said, there are certainly companies like Salesforce that succeeded getting into Fortune 500 companies by having individual salespeople pay for tiny licenses and then growing. So that's a strategy, and you can explain that you could explain that strategy, right? But if you're right off the bat trying to get a $250,000 sale, like that's the base level entry price for your product, you need to probably have a sales team. You probably need to have high touch marketing. You probably need to have brand marketing, et cetera, at trade shows, right? So just understand how it, like what it takes, what steps does it take to sell into the customers. And so to the extent that you've already done this successfully, just write them down. Let's say you only have a couple of customers, write down every touch point as you're preparing the slide. Think about it. You should already know this, but the exercise of writing down, like, how do we get into this customer? How do we get them to pay? Who do we have to talk to? Who are the decision makers? How long was the sales cycle? These are like important questions that you should know off the top of your head if you only have a few customers. So these are things you'll want to put on there. And conversely, if you're advertising through Facebook to consumers to try to sell something, it always pays to have some understanding of what's working, what the audiences are, how big those audiences are. And then if you really want to wow VCs, just sort of in terms of any type of way that you're selling, having some super clear anecdotes that are true about how you sold to big company X or how particular consumers found you, and then having those be essentially templates that you've done quite a few times. Those are really powerful, those examples where you walk the VC quickly through the story of how you sold into an enterprise, assuming that is in fact reflective of how you intend to continue to sell, right? Where I think some early stage companies have problems here is where the founder perhaps knows a few people in the industry and sells to those 3 people. And suddenly what's the next sale coming from? Those examples don't work anymore. Just think about how that needs to, you're building a muscle here. Venture capitalists are giving you the money to build the muscle to do the sales and marketing. So you need to be able to articulate what you've done and what you're about to do to get there.
Yeah. And there's a big difference here between a business model and a repeatable business model, right? And so that repeatable piece is really where what you're looking for here. And once you have that nailed down, like, hey, we can use this sales playbook day in, day out and get more customers. That's really the ultimate goal of this. Now, that isn't to say that if you haven't got a repeatable business model, that you can't have a go-to-market slide. You still need it. But it's worth highlighting. It's like, hey, we have some idea about what we can do in this market, or we have some idea how we can reach those customers, and we're going to continue to do that. But we also know that there's 6 or 7 other customer profiles where we don't really know yet. And this is a conversation, especially for super early stage companies. VCs see so many different companies at so many different stages. This could be the beginning of a really fruitful conversation where you say, hey, we figured some of them out. We have 5 or 6 more in the pipeline where we don't really know yet fully how we're going to do it. Do you have anybody we can talk to, right? And that can be super powerful. And there's so many different go-to-market strategies, right? You could do partnerships, you can do distribution to retailers, you can do direct to retailers, you can do direct to consumer. there's licensing deals, there is software as a service subscription models, right?
Mhm.
All of these different models exist. And this slide should probably outline where you're going to start your journey.
Right.
And the reason I'm harping on about this is that I speak to a lot of founders, especially in the hardware space, who are like, oh yeah, we have one distributor who's going to do this for us. And we also do direct to consumer. And we also started selling into Amazon. And then there's this corporate deal where we sell so many thousand. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're describing an organization here that needs at least 15, 20 people just to keep the wheels on the wagon. And you don't have 15 people. How is this going to scale, right? Because all of these distribution channels and all of these different sales channels need different amount of touch and different expertises. So as a company, you want to find one that is like your core focus for sales, and then maybe a couple of bonus ones for experimentation. But really, your main sales channel needs to be one, and it needs to be working.
Right. And another thing that I think works very well here is sometimes companies have geographic expansion plans where they figure out how to execute in a particular city, and then they move out, or they are located in, say, the Northeast, and they have salespeople who travel around and focus on that, and they can mirror that as they move across the country and internationally. Those work really well. Other places where I've seen this be really successful is when a company is focused in a very particular vertical. So let's say selling to insurance agents, but they also think that they can sell to some like a wealth managers who might be tangential. So that maybe the product is this is where you can actually have a problem where your product is very broad. It can be hard to find a niche to focus on, but if you have a niche that you're in and there are tangential ones that you can get into pretty easily with very minor product changes, and it's just the same playbook, those tend to work really well because the investors can get their head around what you've just done that's working, and then the next thing you're doing is very logical and it feels lower risk.
Yep, 100%.
Great. Well, let's talk about how this does change as the company gets or matures, right? So an angel or maybe even like a pre-seed company with the product not launched yet, no revenues, Hai, what do you think about this slide?
I think this is one of the most interesting instances of this slide, right? So you have, as a company evolves, the team evolves, and the type of people involved with the company, it all changes and evolves and kind of up levels as you go through. And at the earliest stages, you don't really need a sales operation. You don't really need a marketing operation, right? You're building product, you're getting ready to launch. And if you had a bunch of people, I don't know, doing Instagram, it's just a waste of time at that point. And as soon as you change gears into selling, you need to show that you know what is changing in your company as that happens. And so I think for the earliest stage companies, it is kind of counterintuitive, but this slide becomes super, super important. Because I'm sure you have seen this happen, Haley. I've definitely seen this happen. Really promising company in a huge market with a great product completely falls over as soon as it starts selling because they're completely stacked with incredibly talented engineers, really good product people, and nobody knows how to sell anything. And so you've got to show that you can do it or that you can hire the right people.
So a way that you can succeed as an engineer or a product person, or maybe like a very young or inexperienced founder who's attacking an industry that you haven't been in before, is go out and find advisors and mentors who have the experience in industry and figure out what they did successfully. So, you're an engineer and you are trying to produce some sort of software tool to sell into the biggest banks in the world. Work your way into salespeople who have sold software to big banks and ask them questions like, how did you do it? Like, what was the marketing action? Like, how are the sales connections made? How do the buyers make decisions? Who are the buyers? Like, go find mentors or advisors who are targeting the same customer base but selling a different product and figure out how they've done it.
Yeah. I don't want to go too deep into kind of strategy here, but a lot of very good product people like making user personas. Well, you can have user personas for your sales targets too. And having those in place and thinking like, hey, our customers are actually the SVPs at banks. That is a really good thing to know. Now, the next step is, how do you find them? If you know how to find them, how do you reach them? If you know how to reach them, how do you sell to them, right? And having a very clear sales funnel in mind, especially if that's backed up with somebody who's done this 100 times before, as you just said, Haley, that can be a really powerful narrative. Even though you haven't made a single sale yet, you can get to a place far down the line there.
Excellent.
Another thing we often see for like D2C companies is creating a shadow company. So create a company that sells the thing you are selling, and you could start doing some of your marketing. Whenever somebody makes a sale, you just refund them. It doesn't matter. That wasn't the purpose of the exercise, but it means you can get some ideas about the customer acquisition cost and that kind of thing. So by the time you go and raise money, you can say, hey, we actually set up a company that kind of does what we did, just so we can start experimenting. We have our entire end-to-end sales funnel figured out, and we think that this is our customer acquisition cost. We just need to switch over to campaigns and we're good to go. I've seen that done extremely successfully with aggressive D2C companies, but of course you can't really tap your entire network for SVPs at banks and do the same. So think very carefully about how you run your experiments. And yeah, this slide should reflect all of that.
Right. So you additionally talk about what you're going to try.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So either through the mentors or through your network or through previous experience, what tactics or channels you're going to try with the money that's coming in order to prove that or build the muscle around the sales and marketing engine.
Right.
Now, so that's for really early stage companies that haven't really launched a product or just starting to get a little bit of sales. But as your company starts to have more and more sales, this slide gets to be a lot less. You still want to look forward, but you start to be able to base it on a solid foundation of what's actually working, right?
Yeah.
So then after you start to sell, you hopefully have some channels that are working at attractive costs. You should mention those, right?
Yeah.
And you should mention them in terms of what the costs are and how scalable they are, how you expect them to grow over time, how you want to continue to invest in them. So as you approach the A, there's got to be a lot more meat on here. And in particular, you should be prepared if you have to go deep into particular channels. And if you're
Absolutely.
not the sales and marketing leader of the organization, you want to make sure that you've really been briefed adequately by whoever is running that. Now, as an early stage CEO, you probably have to have your hands in everything, but you should be prepared for VCs to occasionally go really deep on this slide, even in an initial meeting. And it just may have to do with that VC's particular experience or what they're really good at. So just as you build the slide, just be prepared for them to double click on anything that you have on here. Just be ready. And that becomes, again, more and more important. And then by the series B, this slide should be very baked. It should have information around like a sales cycle or what channels are working and the cost per channel. So maybe elasticity may be too technical of a term, but how big those channels can flex into or how fast you think they can grow. And then sort of a list of where you're going next. So Series B, this slide is going to be pretty darn robust.
Well, and for Series B, really, you're raising money to execute this slide, right?
Right.
That is really what you're raising money for. The
Right.
product is more or less there. Your team is more or less there. You're really saying, hey, pour $10 million or $100 million into the top of this thing, and $50 or $500 million fall out the bottom. We have it. We have it nailed down. We know what we're doing, and so it's really at the later stages. This slide is your how we're going to spend our money slide for a lot of companies.
Exactly. Great. Well, why don't we jump into the two examples that we have?
Yeah, let's do it.
I will share the screen. So as I get the sharing up, just remind everybody the caveats I always say about these two slides we produced, or the two decks.
Yeah, so we put together two companies, and they're both pretty silly. One of them was a beer subscription company that I made a slide deck for my book. Called Pitch Perfect, and the other one is called 4P, which is a plumbing company. And again, they're both pretty silly companies, but the idea is to really use this as a tool for having a conversation about why these slides work and what doesn't work about them.
Exactly. Great. So let's take a look at them. So again, the beer subscription one is the one I have pulled up now. This is a direct to consumer. It's very early stage. It is not really having generated a lot of sales. Yep. So, what we're talking about on here is the who the customer is and how they're reachable, and got some blurbs around the cost, customer acquisition cost, and mentioning a geographic rollout, which makes sense for a business that is shipping a perishable item. So, Haya, kind of talk through what your thought process was as you put this slide together, and how a similar direct consumer company might think about building their slide out.
Yeah. So on purpose, this doesn't say everybody who likes beer, right? Because that is a very large group of people. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your opinion on beer, in this country, a lot of beer that's sold is not actually very good beer. And so it doesn't help to say, okay, everybody who's ever drunk a Budweiser is our target audience, because that is patently false. So here, what this slide is trying to do is to kind of explain a little bit like who the type of consumers are that we think we can go after. Now, discerning hipsters, the kind of people who will seek out interesting flavors, who might make their own beer or who might make their own kombucha or whatever, could be an interesting market to tap into. For one, you get a lot of free word of mouth, but you also get a lot of they are out there looking for new things to try, and that puts you kind of on the front foot. In this particular pitch, I also thought about foodies specifically, right? People who are very specifically into trying new foods and trying very good food, and making beer a more accessible thing, where otherwise they might try wine pairings, for example. So I think it's, and again, if this company were to become very successful, you would have a lot more target audiences further down the line. But this seems like a sensible place to try. And if it completely falls flat, maybe that says something about the market or your product. And what I'm doing here is saying, okay, this is reachable through advertising. So paid acquisition with a pretty big range on this particular site. It says 80 to 180. Now that's a big range. And as an investor, I would go, what's going on here? Why is this range so big? This slide is actually modified from a customer I had once. So this range actually showed up on their slide deck. And I challenged them on it, and they were actually, well, we have multiple channels. The $180 range, they thought would scale infinitely. And the $80 range, they thought, well, this is going to get tapped out pretty soon. So this actually makes that into a pretty interesting conversation. So if you quickly want to get a bunch of customers, you pump the $80 acquisition channel.
180, you mean? You pump the 180, right? If you want to get them quickly, you've got.
Sorry, yes. If you want to get them quickly, you pump the 180. And if you want to get more experimental kind of customers, or you want to kind of wiggle your way through or save some money potentially, you can tap that other channel. But I think because the cohort of potential people to advertise to in that smaller range wasn't that good, it means that you exhaust that channel really quickly.
So this particular pitch deck is for a company that's really early stage and hasn't gotten a lot of traction. Now, if this company actually had and thousands of customers they were adding every month, and the customer count, like new customer growth, was accelerating really aggressively. So maybe they had 1,000 customers last month, and then this month they're going to add 1,100 customers. And continued like it's insane growth on that trajectory. Having kind of and they had a high LTV, so the customers were worth like $1,000 or something like that. Mm-hmm. The range here would be incredibly attractive. Actually, it would be really appealing. You would say, oh my gosh, you've got your maybe 5x is your worst LTV to CAC. So these acquisition cost ranges are amazing, and let's go kind of push go more on it. Instead, this is like an earlier stage company. So what's happening here is that the founders are giving the VC a chance to have a dialogue about, hey, we have a range of how we get customers. Let's talk about it. We'll prove to you we're thoughtful around having different channels and exploring different channels and understanding what the different channels are capable of. And then it's also teasing the influencer, which is saying, hey, we have this other thing we want to go try out with the money you're going to give us. Right. So this slide is actually relatively powerful for the stage of company that this one is. But if you could imagine that this was a company that was firing all cylinders in terms of actually getting customers, then this slide would be excellent.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think because you're shipping, again, perishables around, and, they have like a little unit that they're shipping out to people, which is like a little beer tap thing. It makes sense to have like a kind of concierge service to start out, and to kind of do that only in your local area. So you can talk to your actual customers, maybe observe them set up the system and see if there's any product issues there. So they're actually thinking about this, or this company is thinking about it in a way that doesn't scale, but that's on purpose. That's by design. So they can really keep a close eyes on the customer. And then they say ready for rollout, and you'd better be ready to defend that, right? If you've just got a list of companies, that's not ready for rollout. What would be ready for rollout is we have hired 1 or 2 people in each of these locations. We know how to ship. We know how to get these customers. And if you look at this list of companies or list of cities, they all have a bunch of things in common, mostly that they're full of hipsters, but also that they have strong beer cultures and all that kind of thing. And so as an investor, if I'm looking at this, it's like, okay, well, that it is a pretty widely distributed set of markets. So it's going to include some logistics challenges, but clearly the founders have thought enough about it that they're able to do like a phased rollout. Then the next question that would come out of my mouth is like, okay, now what about the rest of the country, right? Because you can't keep hiring people in every single city where you're going to start shipping. Yeah,
that's true. And you also want to make sure that this slide doesn't make it feel like your opportunity is too small. If you're selling a $10,000 product and there's only 100 companies that can buy it on the planet, you got a problem, right? So you just want to make sure that this slide doesn't accidentally peg you into having too small of a market size for a venture capital investment.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, there's a couple of companies out there. Peloton, for example, have this hands-on setup thing, right? Where they send a van to your house, that they install the Peloton for you. It's a very, very expensive product, but it's a very white glove hands-on experience, or it used to be anyway. I don't know if they still do that. But they had that as part of their service. And that meant that they could only ship to certain cities for a while there until they went national and kind of started doing it that way.
Yeah. Great. Well, why don't we switch over to the B2B example? So this is specifically wanted to have 2 different types of pitch deck templates, one that was more consumer focused and one that could actually rely on a sales team. So this is a better way to look at a company that potentially can have a sales team. And I think one of the powerful things on this slide deck is that it's helping you see how the sales team helps drive a really attractive customer acquisition cost. Yeah. This is like sales is a channel that works really well, particularly for B2B. And I've worked with companies that have high growth sales teams, and VCs understand that go to market and they understand that method. So this is a really great thing to put on here. And if you're going to have a sales team, you're going to want the double click. Next question is around like sales cycle, sales compensation. Mm-hmm. You'll want to make sure you have those numbers and that information in the back of your head or an appendix slide so that you can show to the investor you understand what you're actually saying here. You're not just reading off a slide.
Yeah. And one pro tip there as well. I've seen people do this wrong, and it's really interesting, where they confuse account management with sales. Now, if I saw this slide, I would say, okay, what happens after you've made a sale, right? If the answer is, oh, the salesperson continues to help the company or help the new customer, I'd be like, oh, wait a minute, how many sales can they make once they're looking after 100 customers, right? So there has to be a really good handover from the sales team making the sales, and again, really, really good at that, and then figuring out what happens after. So you have a account management team or a customer service team or an onboarding team or something like that. So the kind of the pointy end of the spear is your sales team, and they do their job really, really well. The other thing I would challenge here is like, okay, your customer acquisition cost is less than $90 per customer. Does that include the wage of the sales team and the bonuses and all that kind of stuff, right? Because if it's their actual cost, as in the cost of acquisition, again, this should be super clear, but some founders get this wrong, and it makes you look pretty bad if you have to kind of backpedal.
So the other thing that a sales-driven growth strategy gives you is it helps make your pipeline a little more predictable, and it helps make your forecasts a little more predictable. So if each salesperson can close 5 deals a month and you have 2 salespeople, then you better be closing 10 deals this month and 10 deals next month, unless you've just added a lot of salespeople already ramped, right? So a place where it's not necessarily gotcha, but it will make a VC kind of cock their head and question you a little bit, is if they say, how many salespeople do you have? 2, how many deals can they close? 5, how many deals are you supposed to close next month? And then your model and your projections say that you're closing 50, but you only have 2 salespeople, so it should be 10. That's where they're going to ask you like, well, I don't understand. This doesn't make sense. Like, how's that happening? So, keep in mind that if your growth is predicated on the sales team, you've got to have those people working for you. It's called butts in seat. They've got to be working for you, and they've got to be fully ramped so they can close the number of deals you're supposed to do in your projections.
Yeah. And the other thing worth mentioning here, so the sales team has one cost of acquisition here, $90 per customer. It's great. The next one is a word of mouth, right? Where you say we offer a $500 referral fee, and more than 250 new customers have joined us as a result, right? With incredible retention, only 11% churn after 12 months. That is wonderful, but now suddenly you're looking at a $500 cost of acquisition for this particular channel. Now, if this is a particularly sticky channel, that's great. If it can be split out from not having to do a bunch of additional advertising, or if it just means that the sales team doesn't have to look after those customers, if this reaches customers that the sales team can't, that becomes a really valuable channel. But it all has to, and all of these kind of get multiplied up into your blended CAC to kind of figure out what is your overall customer acquisition cost.
Right. And so there's one thing on here that's the press side that I want to talk about a little bit as a potential gotcha or issue. So I'm going to sort of jump ahead to common issues. A mistake that I see is that unsophisticated sales and marketing, unsophisticated founders, so founders who don't know a lot about sales and marketing, will just say PR is how they're going to get customers, and they'll not really understand what that means. If the press and PR is what's going to drive your customers, you ought to have a very clear sort of connecting the dots in terms of, we have these press events that have occurred and it's led to particular customers. Kind of a lot of times press or PR as your go-to-market strategy shows an unsophisticated founder, particularly for companies that have yet to actually generate any meaningful sales. So
well, and wearing my press hat, right? So I'm a journalist at TechCrunch, and it is extremely peaky, right? Somebody hits, like I write about something at TechCrunch, people read it, they get lots and lots and lots of traffic, and sometimes they even see a bump in sales. But there's a pretty high bar for getting covered in the press, right? It has to be new, it has to be interesting, it has to be interesting to the readers. So even if you manage to get one press bump, that doesn't mean you're guaranteed another one. The one exception for that, and the less peaky one there, is if you ship a product that is reviewable. So if you have a hardware product or a service or something that people are actually interested enough in that they're reviewable. Or say if you're shipping cars, right? People read car reviews all the time because it's such an important purchase. Now suddenly you're talking about a market where reviews become super important. And if you have a very robust reviews program, making sure that you're reviewed in all the press outlets, that could potentially be a go-to-market. But as Healy just said, this is almost impossible to pull off well, and certainly in the long term, it's almost impossible. So it's often that this falls in the bucket of vanity metrics, and there's a big difference between earned media, which is where you kind of get people write about you because you're inherently interested. So, for example, right now, Tesla actually disbanded their entire PR office. They just don't care anymore because they know they get so much press no matter what they do that their press works fantastically well. And be very honest with yourself. Are you Tesla? Chances are no. And in that case, you can't rely on that.
Right. That's right. And so the other aspect or angle of that is understanding how customers actually purchase your product is important. We mentioned that. And so press maybe works for small business sales and for consumer sales. But if this is a $500,000 hardware sale into a large enterprise, that press piece is not going to be the thing that makes somebody wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm going to buy this thing. It may help along the way, and it may be the reason they first call you, but there's got to be many, many steps in between that, like sort of the awareness to the actual purchase happening, that the press is not necessarily going to be the primary reason that's happening. So in terms of like making sure you're thinking through the slide and avoiding some of the common pitfalls, be really careful if you're mentioning press. Just be pretty careful, because that's a place where if you do it wrong, it can be a tell for you being an unsophisticated founder.
And it's funny as well, because I kind of have a counterexample too, which is we got covered, one of my previous companies, we got covered on Good Morning America right before Christmas in like a Christmas roundup. Our sales went through the roof. It's the best Christmas we ever had. It went absolutely bananas. And there is no way we could have predicted that, right? So we actually had a completely opposite problem, which is that our entire warehouse was empty at the end of that sale. Yeah. And so we left a lot of money on the table because we had this press coverage that we didn't predict. It was completely organic. Somebody just thought it was cool and we got covered. We didn't know until it was like announced. And then we were like, oh crap. So don't count on press. It's good to have press as part of your media mix and as part of your marketing mix, but I wouldn't count on it.
Right. And so, other common issues we've seen on this slide is certainly where B2C in particular, but also B2B companies not having a good grasp on their customer acquisition cost.
Yeah.
And so certain like if you're really, really good, actually, I shouldn't even say this, but if you're really, really good at sales and marketing, you may be able to convince a venture capitalist to exclude certain numbers from your customer acquisition cost. But you've got to be really good. In general, they're going to expect that all the sales and marketing expenses are lumped in there, even salaries, branding expenses, PR expenses that are not designed to drive sales, even ramping sales folks and sales trainers, et cetera. So, just be prepared to really understand your customer acquisition cost and talk about it. And if you are a company that is just starting out and you don't have anything here, just understand how much the sales team, if you need a sales team, understand how much they're going to cost.
Yeah.
Right. If you're going to understand the conversion rates on Google AdWords, right? So you might be able to buy a Google AdWord for $2, but that doesn't mean you're going to get a customer for $2 because they have to come to your website and fill out a form. So what's the form completion rate, right? And then they got so just kind of think through every step of the way here and don't get caught up with and look really naive around your customer acquisition cost.
Yeah, it's worth being very good at that. The other common issue that I see a lot is like people, like as a consumer, you're very used to consumer marketing and consumer advertising, right? So you might be driving down the freeway here in San Francisco and you see an advert for Twilio or you see an advert for Salesforce. Now, that is known as like customer awareness or branding campaigns. That is not the way to do marketing for your very early stage B2B company, right? So don't over-index on your customer awareness. That is just not, you can spend so much money without it converting that it's just not, it shouldn't be part of your mix really. So you can't necessarily do what the big companies are doing because you're not a big company. So it's a good idea to make sure you have your strategy kind of really buttoned up so you can double down on that.
Exactly. And so the other place to, the other major issue that we've already mentioned a little bit is when the founder, the CEO, you're an engineer, or you're technical and sales and marketing is not something you have a lot of experience with. You need to prep yourself and get prepared. And as you move into the later stages, even if you're not naturally a sales and marketing person, you need to be able to speak to this stuff at the Series B as the CEO. Even if you were the founding engineer who's the CEO guy now, you got to have a handle on this stuff, even if you don't love it. It matters.
And remember that your CFO has less to do with sales than you would think. So I've seen founders who try and pull their like finance person in. It's like, no, that's not sales. Sales is sales. Finance is finance. So, get the right people and get the right people around the table. And there's nothing wrong with like, if you do an early pitch to a VC, if they start asking questions like, hey, I am the product and tech CEO. I have a really good sales team. Would you mind, I can answer what I can, but in a later meeting, let me pull my salespeople in. That's a perfectly fine thing to say, especially in early screening meetings.
As long as the revenue growth, if your revenue growth looks good, you can definitely get away with that.
Right. If it doesn't, yeah, you're right. And the other thing, we've mentioned this a couple of times, acquisition channels get dried up. And what I mean by that is, imagine you have like a company that has, like you have access to 5 or 6 really high-end companies that buy your product. By the time you've worked your way through your Rolodex is empty. You can't reach out to more people. And that means that acquisition channel is dry. The same happens for paid ac, right? You might find this really specific niche group of people to advertise to on Facebook. The customer acquisition cost is fantastic, but eventually everybody who was going to buy has bought. And at that point, there's, you can pump as much money into that as you want. You're not going to make another sale, or sales drop off precipitously. So think about how big the cohort is and how you can kind of make new cohorts or new groups of people as you work your way through that
and
channel.
It's very normal, and it's actually great for companies to initially sell to people that they know, but that is not make for a very, very powerful go-to-market slide. Saying, hey, I'm just working my way through my the contacts of my iPhone and I'm selling to them. eventually, you're going to run out of contacts in your iPhone. So
Yeah.
you need to build a real system here at some point.
Yeah. And there's a
Well,
parallel
great.
here
So
too with your hiring, right? First, you tap up everybody you know who you've worked with in the past who would be a great match, but you very soon run out of people you've worked with. And now you have to do the hard part of hiring, which is throwing a wider net. Same thing with sales.
exactly. That's great. All right. So again, this slide is really important. I think we worked through all the issues here. Do you think we missed anything?
That's good.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. So let's kind of like talk about why this slide is important, right? So you, the founder, you get to talk about your sales and marketing strategy. You get to show some numbers around how you've been successful at acquiring customers at an attractive cost. You're proving that you understand how customers purchase and you understand the structure of the market, like if there's distributors or value-added resellers, or if it's going through retail or app stores or whatever, you're proving that you understand that, and you're packaging it up in a way that the venture capitalists can kind of file it away in their brain so that it kind of fits in with their rubric. And you're also showing where you're going to spend money, the money that you're about to get. You're showing them the muscle and the experiments that you're building with that money. And Haya, I think we hit pretty much everything here. Anything you want to summarize up?
Yeah, I think in summary, it's kind of this is your opportunity to shine and to show that you know how to pivot and experiment in the earlier stages, and that you know how to execute in the later stages. It shows that you really understand your audience and your target customers, and the obvious stuff. Where do they hang out? How do you reach them? How do you convince them to buy? And that you understand your different channels, your go-to-market channels. If you manage to do those three things on this slide, you've nailed it, basically.
Yeah. And a very powerful thing that I've seen work on this slide are specific examples of customers that purchased that are essentially indicative of how many customers will purchase. So a story of how you sold into a large enterprise that is similar to several other enterprises that you're selling into or already sold into, or a story of how a particular consumer or group of consumers found you and started using the product that is extrapolatable or is templatizable into other consumers. So those stories actually like really help pull the investor in and help them understand a lot more tangibly what's going on in the slide. So to the extent you've got a story plus the data and then the strategy and the template, pulling those things together can really make this a compelling slide.
Yeah, and these are just all different playbooks for different types of customers. And so for this customer, that works. For this customer, that works. And showing that you have enough wherewithal to capture that information and to really put together the information that your sales team needs, that's gold dust, because it shows that you really deeply understand what the levers are and what the mechanics are in the sales part, both strategically and the operations side of sales.
Perfect. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much again. kruzeconsulting.com/pitch-deck, where you can get the whole series of venture capital pitch deck materials that we're putting together. And until our next episode, happy pitching.